Hi everyone, this is Paul here for the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm going to be talking about Mars Retrograde, which starts on the 26th of June and finishes on the 27th of August. And I'll be outlining some of the key themes that this retrograde will be covering for us to be reflecting on at this time. But before I do that, I just want to clarify that, as usual, the astrology doesn't control us in any way, shape or form. It's just a way of understanding what the energies are doing and what kind of spiritual lessons we can potentially be learning at this point in time. But it's up to each and every one of us to actually learn the lessons. They're not forced upon us. We actually have to work with the energies in order to make things happen. Now with Mars represents our actions and desires, but the thing with Mars retrograde is, due to the nature of Mars' orbit relative to Earth, Mars retrogrades are the least common that we get. So they happen on average about once every 2 years, as opposed to on an annual basis that all the other planets, barring Venus, go through. So for most of the planets, the retrogrades can happen like clockwork. We, to some extent, accustomed to them. With Mars, on the other hand, because it's so infrequent, it sometimes comes as a bit more of a shock or a bit more of a disruption, because whilst we may have been happily going along, taking the various actions that we need to towards any particular goals we have, when Mars turns retrograde, that outwards directed energy towards desire and action gets inverted, because we're now being asked to reflect on our actions and desires. So as a result, we may find that actions that we normally take for granted now require more conscious effort in order for us to execute them. But this is just to serve to try and prompt us to slow down and pay close attention to the nature of the actions that we're committing to each time, and what goals and desires are we actually trying to pursue, in the sense that, are they right for who we are, or are we pursuing something that's just an egoic desire that's temporary and won't actually lead to any permanent growth on our part. With the action side, it's about making sure that our actions are conscious, they're not just impulsive. So when Mars is retrograde, this is a time where we may find that we start to feel or get in touch with the undercurrents of psychic states that drive our actions and desires. So it's understanding, where do we actually have residual anger from other areas? Where do we maybe have repressed energy inside us that wants to be released through creative actions and creative pursuits, but for whatever reason we repress ourselves so we don't go pursue the goals that we want to achieve. But with this particular retrograde, it straddles two signs. It's starting off in Aquarius, but on the 13th of August, Mars will retrograde backwards into Capricorn. So this retrograde will be a retrograde of two parts, if you like, or two distinct themes. Now, in Aquarius, we're dealing with things like the desire for freedom, the desire for originality, or desire for the unconventional, and taking actions along these lines. So part of it could be, when Mars is retrograde, we may find ourselves evaluating, how free are we? Do we feel stuck somewhere? Are we really free in the environment that we are? Or do we feel controlled in some way, shape or form? Now bear in mind that for any true freedom to actually be achieved, it requires that each and every one of us takes personal responsibility for our own lives. We can't blame stuff on other people. It's not a time for just attaching our anger to other people and using them as a hook for our projections. It's a common pattern within human behaviour. If something's annoyed us or made us angry, but it's not something we feel comfortable dealing with at the source of the problem, quite often that anger then gets displaced onto other people. But obviously, if we project anger onto other people who haven't done anything to us in any way, shape or form, that then creates karma. So part of the Mars retrograde is about evaluating our behaviour, evaluating our actions, and seeing where we're creating karmic repercussions for ourselves because we're engaging in impulsive action that will actually undermine our well-being in the long run, and it's not going to really achieve anything beneficial, because we may achieve something but it won't be worth the price to pay in terms of the karma it evokes for us. So part of the Mars retrograde is becoming conscious of the way we commit actions, the motive, and it's not just about the actions, it's also the desires and motivations behind it. Because just because you don't commit an action doesn't mean that you won't necessarily create karma for ourselves if there's some kind of ill intent we're contemplating. So this is where it's important we evaluate the desire function of Mars as well, to make sure that the desires that we're pursuing are not completely selfish. They're not only about ourselves at the expense of other people. It's learning how can we make sure that the actions that we commit to take into fact the fact we're connected to everyone else around us in one way or another, whether we're aware of it or not. So if our actions are going to cause suffering or negative impact on other people, then that creates karma for ourselves. So we'll then experience something to help us understand how it feels to be on the receiving end of that particular kind of action. So also with Aquarius, as well as it being about personal freedom, it's about humanitarian. Aquarius kind of operates on two levels. On the one level, it's the whole group consciousness and sense of social consciousness, so it's basing our identity on the groups it's been part of. But at the higher level, Aquarius is about that individuation, but that's not about becoming more special than anyone else. A key part of it is understanding that we're interconnected with everyone around us. So if we really want the world to change, then we have to be prepared to put aside personal interests and start looking at a more humanitarian perspective on things. How can we make sure that the actions and goals that we're pursuing will actually benefit humanity as a whole and not just ourselves at the expense of others? So it's applying that broader understanding and that broader awareness of the interconnection of all life, and understanding that any action we take creates a ripple effect that passes out through the collective unconscious and eventually ripples back to us, and the nature of the actions will determine the nature of the karmic ripples that come back. Are our actions motivated by love and a desire to help other people in a way that empowers people rather than cultivating dependency? Or are we only focused on ourselves, the whole me, myself and I, and I'm alright, Jack, doesn't matter if anyone else is suffering, I'm okay, that's all that matters. Because we're operating from that position, we're moving into a time where that way of being isn't going to work for much longer. The whole rugged individualist mentality that's been a key part of society for a long time is starting to be revealed to come to the end of its period where it's deemed acceptable, for the simple reason that we're in a time of transformation, and all the different things happening around us are highlighting how everything is interconnected, and we can't just keep doing things blindly and without thought for consequence. Everything we're doing has a consequence on our environment. It has a consequence on the rest of humanity in one way or another. So something that we do here may inadvertently have a ripple effect and affect people in a completely different location that's nowhere near where we are. So it's about that sense of taking action that is based on social responsibility. We understand that we're a part of a collective whole, so it's important that we make sure our actions are driven by desires and motivations that are humanitarian, and take into account the collective nature of humanity, and that we have an impact on the people around us, so we need to be careful as to what actions and desires we pursue. And this kind of culminates when the Sun opposes Mars around about the 27th of July, and this will mark the midpoint of the retrograde. And this can be a time where, because Mars and the Sun are opposing one another, we may find that any repressed anger suddenly comes bursting to the surface, and it's important that we be careful that we don't project this energy onto other people. It's important we take that breath that calms the mind for a moment and make sure we don't just spew our anger onto other people, which then sets off a chain reaction where the anger just gets passed from person to person. It's learning to take that moment, or create that space between something happening and our reaction to it. And rather than reacting with anger, it's learning to respond with assertiveness. It's taking the angry energy out of it and making sure that our actions are assertive, they're calm, they're measured, and they're only, the magnitude of them is relative to the situation at hand. So we don't go into any kind of overkill, we don't try and smash things apart or try and bulldoze our way through. We take that time to pause for a moment, gather our thoughts, and make sure that the need to address an issue doesn't spiral into anger or aggression. It maintains that calm assertiveness where we maintain or assert our own sense of self-identity to make sure that we're not being undermined. At the same time, we don't go at it with an angry perspective that's going to hurt other people. We do it from an assertive perspective, and we direct it only at the issue at hand that's actually causing the problem. But it's also, with Mars is also a very instinctual kind of energy, but a lot of the time, because of the way we're conditioned socially, we lose contact with these instincts. So sometimes it's important that we take that time and pay attention to the raw instincts that do come through, and we see what are they telling us, what information are we picking up on that we're at the moment currently overriding with our thoughts. So those instincts then get buried in the subconscious and ignored, so we end up doing things which aren't actually right for us or will undermine our own well-being. So part of the Mars retrograde could be about reflecting on how well are we able to assert ourselves, how well can we identify our own instincts or our own intuition, and how can we, because the thing is, Mars is all about doing, but Mars retrograde is more about being, and it's this clash of when do we do something and when do we just sit still and be. Because we need to have that balance between the two. If we're always doing something, we lose touch with who we are. But if we're always just sitting there being, we don't actually make anything happen. So this is part of the balance that Mars retrograde calls us to address. It's taking that time to just be, rather than always having to be committing to action and overloading ourselves. Sometimes we need that time to just slow down, to not be taking action at that particular point, and to just learn to be, so we stay in touch with who we are. Now, as I mentioned before, Mars will retrograde back into Capricorn on the 13th of August and remain there obviously until the end of the retrograde on the 27th of August when Mars will turn direct again. So during this part of the retrograde, it's looking at, the actions that we take, are they measured? Are they controlled by self-discipline? Are they controlled by patience, so they're not impulsive or rash? Are we able to act in a patient and controlled manner? Do we have that persistence and perseverance to pursue the same line of action towards this dedicated goal, providing of course the action is the right course of action. If obviously it's not the right course of action to achieve a certain goal, then it's important we course correct and we approach things from a different way, and we take a new line of action towards that goal. But it's also a time of seeing, are we only do we only ever focus on our self-interest, or do we also make sure that what we're doing is out of a sense of integrity and based on the understanding that there are certain karmic laws, or there are karmic laws rather, never mind certain. We have to understand the karmic laws to begin with, but it's important that we live our lives aligned with them if we don't want to create karma through wrong action. So it's a time of focusing on developing that sense of right action, and make sure that we only do things which are actually beneficial for both ourselves and will not cause harm for others. So it's making sure that we understand ourselves enough to identify whether the actions or goals we set for ourselves are actually appropriate. And the thing is, if we're pursuing a line of action for a goal that isn't right for who we are, this is a time when we may struggle to keep committing to that particular goal, and it may be a time where we have to just terminate that particular project and pay close attention to who are we, who are we truly, and what goals really matter to us, what actually lights that fire of passion, what is actually allows us to be true to who we are, allows us to carve our own niche in life, and allows us to pursue actions and goals that are right for us and will allow us to become self-empowered, and as a result, by making sure everything we do is disciplined and patient, we can then serve as role models for others. But if we're not doing the work ourselves, we can't expect other people to do the work either, because that's just hypocritical. So Mars retrograde for all of us is a time of paying attention to a sense of freedom. So do we actually feel free, or do we feel trapped in any way? Do we have a tendency to rebel rather than focusing on self-realization, which is based on separating ourselves out from the collective unconscious through meditation and other practices to cultivate greater awareness? And how can we become more aware of our actions and desires and make sure they're not just being driven by temporary egoic impulses, they're being driven by the need to pursue a goal that is right for who we are? And it's not only that, but will also benefit the wider community, because we're moving out of time of the rugged individualist and into a time where it's only by working as communities that we can truly thrive, as it were. The time of getting or trying to obtain resources or objects for our own use at the expense of others is come to an end now. It's time for us to work together as communities to take actions that will enhance the community and enhance the welfare of everyone around us. But this requires that we know who we are first of all, and know what gifts we can bring to the table, to the community, and then work together as teams through the objective of building enlightened communities where each person understands what their gifts are, what skills they can bring to the table, what they can provide to help the community, and also learn to share with one another, so that we're not just focused on independence at the expense of all else. We're starting to work towards more humanitarian ideals, and making sure that our actions are humble, honest, and driven by right action rather than egoic impulse. So there's a lot to take on board there, but I hope the Mars retrograde brings you many insights into any source of anger that you may have, or any issues around assertiveness, and I hope it also brings you greater clarity on what goals and desires are actually right for who you are, and what the right kind of actions are to take in line with those goals. As I said at the start, all this will only make things change for us if we actually work with the process and we actually take those actions. We commit to the process of learning who we are and understanding ourselves better, and then taking new, more enlightened actions that will empower ourselves and empower the communities that we're a part of. So I hope it's a useful guide for Mars retrograde. May it bring you many blessings and greater insight into yourself. Take care.